it's not incidental that there's this tradition of you're looking outside your window to figure out what needs to be talked about. The story that you have to tell about your everyday life is a story worth telling. That's something that we all learned from Avery, and it teaches you to take your peers seriously, teaches you to take your neighborhood seriously.
This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Hey, welcome back to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact that arts education has had on both their lives. Today, we have a love letter to the city of Chicago.
Erica, are you perhaps standing behind a forklift? What is happening?
I apologize, dear listeners. I'm in a hotel room and they are conducting a fire alarm test for which they have told me several times to disregard any sounds or lights I may hear or see. So
just in general,
yes.
Just in general. So, I see. So you two are asking our listeners, please disregard.
Yes. Please disregard any lights or sounds you may hear or see while listening to this podcast.
Okay.
And please do not let it detract from your enjoyment of this love letter to the city of Chicago and its arts contributions from our two remarkable guests, Ewing and Avery R. Young. They are both tried and true Chicagoans. I believe Eve even referred to Chicago in our conversation as the greatest city in the world.
Easy. I don't know.
Well,
Easy.
I mean, sweet home Chicago. They are both, I think, also avowed, I don't know if they would say grandchildren, great-grandchildren of poet Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote about the city of Chicago and wrote poetry and made art that inspired generations of artists. Specifically, they talk, I want to give listeners a little bit about the sort of history of youth art making in Chicago in the 90s and 2000s, which is the time that Eve and Avery first came to know each other.
Please disregard any sounds, lights, tastes, smells, really anything other than the sound of Erica's voice. Erica, take it away.
They first came to know each other through an initiative that was originally called Gallery 37, that is now called the After School Matters program. It was started in 1991 during the infamous Daley administration, which was a long-standing Chicago political family. And Daley's wife, Maggie Daley, was a huge supporter of the arts. And so during that time, the city made a very large investment in supporting youth art making. And Gallery 37 was the beginning of an initiative that still exists now, which pays teens for their participation in arts programs over the summer. So rather than getting a minimum wage job at McDonald's or, spending the summer babysitting in your neighborhood, Gallery 37 and After School Matters created an entire ecology of support to encourage particularly young people from communities who maybe hadn't had access to pursue careers and lives in the arts. And Eve was a young person in the Gallery 37 After School Matters world, and Avery was a teaching artist. And they talk extensively both about their relationship with one another, but how that relationship was nested in this ecology of arts organizations. You'll hear them mention Young Chicago Authors, which is a writing program that was embedded in After School Matters that they both worked in. You'll hear them mention Gallery 37. You'll hear them at the end. They will also reference back to one of our favorite episodes with PK, Oak Park River Forest high school teacher Peter Kahn, and his students Langston Kerman and Rich Robbins, who were also part of this rich ecology of artists and poets and young people who came up through this set of programs together to become some of our current arts leaders in the country. Chance the Rapper is probably the most famous artist to come out of this ecology, but they drop a lot of names in the episode that I would encourage you to look up, do some research on, see how this commitment to young people's art making in an entire city has really transformed the arts landscape, from musicians to poets to playwrights to comic book artists nationwide. Enjoy. I am thrilled to welcome the quintessential artist scholar, Dr. Eve Ewing. It would be impossible to list all of Eve's accomplishments and still have time for a conversation on this podcast. And to shorthand her by calling her multidisciplinary does not even begin to capture the scope of her vision. Everything Eve produces is a remarkable exploration of Black life through different lenses, from her award-winning poetry collections, Electric Arches and 1919, to her children's book, Maya and the Robot, to her Marvel Comics series, Ironheart, Black Panther, and Exceptional X-Men, and her scholarly books, Ghosts in the Schoolyard, and newest work, Original Sins, The Miseducation of Black and Native Children and the Construction of American Racism. Eve manages to fluidly include complicated, critical, social, and historical injustices and triumphs in fascinating, genre-bending multimedia works. Eve is in equal parts an artist, sharing deeply of herself and her personal experiences, and an academic, a tenured professor at the University of Chicago, who paints theoretically rich sociological portraits of how systemic racism shapes our schooling system and harms Black and brown children. As Eve says, as she summarizes her own accomplishments and work, even though these things are listed separately, they all live jumbled up together in her head and her heart. And while I could turn this podcast into an Eve Ewing fan fest and a how does she do it all love letter, we are really here to learn about her superhero origin story and becoming, and to give Eve and her mentor a chance to tell us how they have made this kind of magic happen together. Eve Ewing, welcome to Arts Educators Save the World.
Wow, thank you. I was like, oh gosh, I hope this bio ends soon. This is so lovely and mortifying.
I am so blessed to get to talk to folks like you, where I have to try to make an introduction that doesn't go on forever, but I never want to short shrift the range and the scope
Thank you.
of work like yours.
Thank
but
you so much.
You are welcome. You are not the star of today's show.
I'm not. I brought my uncle.
Why don't you call your uncle into the chat?
Yes, so I'm here to present Avery R. Young and the Place to Be.
Always. Yes. Okay. Hey.
Okay, here's the official, and then I'll do the unofficial. Avery R. Young is an interdisciplinary artist and teaching artist, which I know we'll talk a lot about today. He's the author of the poetry collection Neckbone, Visual Verses, which came out on Northwestern University Press. And his essays and poems have also been published in many other anthologies, including The Breakbeat Poets. And his album, Booker T. Soul Train, A Race Record, which came out in 2015, engages matters of race, gender, and sexuality in the United States from the Obama era. It has so many amazing tracks that people need to check out, including my personal favorite, Resurrect Fred. His work in performance, visual text, and sound design has been featured in many exhibitions and theater festivals, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the American Jazz Museum. His theater credits include co-writing and co-producing the soundtrack for the film Haterade Retrograde, the musical, scoring Red Clay Dance Company's Rest, Restore, Nourish, Move, Heal, and writing the libretto for the Lyric Opera of Chicago's Twilight Gods. And he has been called one of our greatest living street poets, one of the most important thinkers of the Black experience. He's also the very first ever in history, since the beginning of time, poet laureate of the world's greatest city, the greatest city in the known multiverse, Chicago, Illinois. He also is a recipient of an Academy of American Poets Laureate Fellowship. Now, That's all well and good, but let me tell you about my personal relationship with Avery R. Young. So Avery is one of those folks who he's not only an important part of my origin story, but countless folks would trace their genealogy back to him, their artistic genealogy. But I mean that not only in terms of arts practice, but what it means to be an artist in the world. I actually didn't plan this, but I'm wearing a shirt with Gwendolyn Brooks on it as we're on this
Yes.
call. And, Gwendolyn Brooks, so many of us are inspired by not only how she made her art, but her vision of telling us that an artist is a person who moves through space. To quote Sesame Street, an artist is a person in your neighborhood. It's a
Yes.
person who has accountability and responsibility in how they live in the world. And, many of us were not fortunate enough to actually meet Miss Brooks in her lifetime or in our lifetimes. And Avery is, one of her many descendants, but I think someone who is in many ways like a next step in her genealogy, in her lineage, because he carries forth that example. And so I've known him at this point for like 24 years, 20, almost coming up on 25 years.
Yes.
And I met him as a young person in an arts organization where he was a teaching artist. And he struck me in so many ways. Number one, his art is beautiful. His art is incredible. He tells stories, he tells parables, really, in a lot of his artwork. And that includes his work on the page. But as we heard from his official bio, all this kind of multidisciplinary work. And really, he is, I got to say, for my money, like probably the greatest performer that I know, and really one of our greatest living performers. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. He
I'm not doing
uses.
this with you,
I
Nate.
know. I know. I'm just saying. I'll wrap it up soon. But the way, if you've ever seen me read, if you've ever seen me perform, you understand that my poetry is always of the body, right? Even if you see me do an academic reading, right? That incorporates the body and movement of the body, presence of the body, because I was trained in a tradition that says that when you interact with people in space, even if you're reading like a nonfiction book, that is an ephemeral co-created experience, right? That is something you are making and
Absolutely.
doing together. And that is something that I very much learned from Avery's example of watching him perform over and over. And I've seen him perform in packed rooms with so many people, and I've seen him perform in, with 24 folks there listening. And his level of energy, his level of presence is always the same. There's a rigor to his work. Everything he does, he's doing for a reason, but it comes through with a kind of sincerity of emotion and ancestry that is truly like a sacred thing. And we were talking about the film Sinners by Ryan Coogler right before we got on the
Yes.
line. And, so many times during that film, I thought about Avery because I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but the preamble, the beginning of the film, there's a word that is shared about the ability of some performers to act as a bridge between this world and other planes of reality, ancestral planes, planes of the future and the past. As an Afrofuturist, I think that those are kind of the same thing. We could talk about that later. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart most sincerely, and I would say this if he was not here as well. Avery is one of those people. He has a gift. He has the gift of the griot, which is to call forth spirits that are unseen by others, but that are always present with us. And so that is like, if you've ever seen me, you've seen him. If you've ever read me, you've read him. If you've ever heard me, you've heard him. I carry his presence with me. There's a poem by E.E. Cummings where he says, "I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart." And that's Avery is somebody that I carry with me in all that I do. So that's the bio. That's my bio.
Okay. My eyes can't hold this water too much longer, so you got to stop.
Okay, I'll wrap it up. You holding up the wrap it up box?
Oh my gosh.
I
Wrap it
will
up,
say this podcast has a high percentage of tears, I think,
Great. Love
relative
it.
to.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's because, these relationships, these long-standing ways in which artists come to make one another are both deeply intellectual, as you said, Eve, but also, really emotional.
Yes.
And not to get too mundane, but I would love to hear more about, so you are a young person, Eve. You have walked in to this arts program in Chicago. The great Avery R. Young is a teaching artist there. What do you each remember about the first time you worked together? What's your earliest memory of being in a space together?
I guess I can start if that's cool. Since I actually encountered Avery on the page before meeting him in person. So I was one of my first kind of like gigs as a young person was I was an editor of a youth produced writing magazine called Say What Magazine.
Right.
Say What Magazine. And it wasn't just a literary magazine, it was like a magazine about writing, which was actually really important. And I remember encountering it as a 15-year-old. Another teaching artist gifted it to me. And actually, I'll rewind a little. This doesn't pertain to Avery, but it has a lesson that I think is important that I want to share. So my mom had some friends over for dinner. And one of the friends was like, hey, my other friend lives a couple blocks away. Can she pop by? My mom said, sure. And the other friend was a woman named Erin Lyons. And
Wow.
Erin came in and she was sitting on the floor around the coffee table. And I was 15 years old and I had just self-produced a zine called Moxie. And I figured out that the Xerox machine in the library at my school was broken. So it was supposed to take a nickel, but it was to make a copy, but it was broken so you could make a copy without a nickel. And so, and like no one else was using that. I mean, kids, they had no reason to use a Xerox machine. So I was just like wearing this thing out, like running off copies. And I made this zine that was like my photos and my like, bad little writings. And I was stapling it together and leaving it in different places. And so Erin, is sitting in my mom's living room and, all the adults are talking. And she looked at me and she said, what do you like to do? And I said, well, I like to write. I'm a writer. And she said, oh, I have something for you. And she gave me these magazines. And I remember they sat on this pile in my bedroom for a while. And, one day, for lack of anything else to do, I opened one up. And I remember I thought, this is the first thing I've ever encountered that people said was made for teenagers that wasn't like goofy and corny and whack. Like this is actually, there's articles in here that are written by and about kids like me, about like writing on the train, about like different neighborhoods in Chicago, about hip hop and punk rock. And, I was like, this is like not corny. Like this is actually like talking to my life. And so I share that story because one of the things that I try whenever I'm in space with young people is to ask them like, what are you about? Like, what are you into? Because somebody asking me that question changed my life. And in that magazine, there was this advice column and it was called Ask Avery. and it was called Ask Avery. And it was Avery answering all your questions about life, but it was written in basically like a vernacular. Like it was written in, like one of Avery's stylistic things is he would never write the word, he would always spell the word black, BLK. And one of his signature phrases is be black and, BE space BLK exclamation point. And, that was also a lesson for me, the idea of style, that one can have a style, that there can be a relationship between the way one speaks and the way one writes on paper. And that he was so hammy, like he was performing through the page, And so all those things it was very funny,
Right.
And so eventually when I met him, I got to see, as folks can tell even from listening, that, he's also very gregarious in person, and has like a, not even larger than life, like larger than lives, like, expansive presence in any space he enters. But at the same time, carries with that a kind of like thoughtfulness and rigor and sincere care for young people, because I've also encountered, not to be cynical, but I've encountered a lot of arts educators where like their commitment to their own bit and their own personality over crowds or overshadows their commitment to young people. So they're so, they have a big presence, and that big presence eclipses a sense of responsibility to young folks. And some of that has to do with like the economy of the arts and trying to get your name out there or whatever. But that's not Avery. Like Avery is really big in the space he takes up. and also like really sincere and committed in his small moments with young people that folks in the public will never see.
Mm. Wow. All I can tell you, Erica, is this one right here. As great as you've talked about her, those accomplishments that she has garnered throughout her life, she has been this greatness upon my first contact with her. It's you know, I would say she was already a flower. Some you work with, and the seeds that you have to like nourish and water and things of that nature. But when we got together, she was already this flower. And for me, the work really wasn't watering and other that's it was just really let's find a pot to put her in. Let's get up out of the dirt, put her in a pot with some more dirt and watch her expand. Right? And watch her expand. And that is like it's just been glorious to watch. She's around folk. Well, I would like to think that for a lot of them, Eve, Xavier, Jamila, a lot of them that come up in that time was that the work is through the body, and it requires more than the body to share it. And I mean, I've learned this in church. I learned this in the Baptist church that the Bible is something that gets arms and legs to these bodies of Black people who come to a space not just to hear a word, but to be edified in a sense. And I tell these people this story, especially in these times where everybody's just so kind of just like downtrodden and feel just a sense of despair, as we should, because it's not cool.
Right. It's not sweet. It's not sweet.
The time we live in is not sweet. But I remember just being in the room with Black people singing to each other, Pharaoh's army got drowned in the Red Sea. And what I learned through that language and through their belief in that language, that executive power is not obsolete power. Right? And it wasn't, and the people that Moses led weren't going through a sweet time. You know, they had to exodus from that level of tyranny. But at the same time, that story tells of a story of how there is favor in the work of the righteous. There's favor in the work of the righteous. And teaching poetry or teaching art or teaching young folk that, okay, we're gonna not make what Newton had to say about the world important as much as about what you have to say about the world is the most important thing that's happening right now. There's a special power you give people when you, especially youth, when they get their voice or access to that voice, and then it becomes a practice, right? Eve had already had a zine to show Aaron, and Aaron was like, "I met this amazing." Sylvia Ewing has like an amazing daughter. You know? And I'm like, the Channel 11 lady? and she was like, yeah. I said, well, of course, whatever comes from her, gonna be great. And then when you meet, and then when I met her mother and her brother, I'm like, great. All of this makes sense to me. You know, all this makes sense to me, but it's really, It was like with Jamila. Jamila had like a
And
haiku.
I gotta do a VH1 what is it called, pop up video.
Yes,
So
please.
Yeah.
Xavier is Xavier Ramey, my
Oh,
dear
sorry.
friend, and that's okay. That's okay. It's my job. And this is my footnotes. So Xavier Ramey is also a young person who grew up at the same time as me, and who now founded and leads an organization called Justice Informed, where he talks about social justice all over the world. And Jamila is Jamila Woods,
Woods.
my dear friend and sister, who is, if you don't know Jamila Woods, like look her up. Amazing singer, amazing poet, amazing person in the world. I also throw in there Nate Marshall,
Nate
my
Marshall.
brother in much that I do, Diamond Sharp. So these
Yes.
are my peers who were also my teachers, right? In everything that Avery, and who also all of them would say that Avery is also their uncle. He has a lot of nieces and
Niece and
nephews and
nephew.
nibblings. Yeah, this he like running around.
And
Did
his
you all
life.
meet? Did you all meet at an organization like a
Yes,
Yes.
yes. So we were all involved in Young Chicago Authors, which is, I guess its most famous alum is Chance the Rapper and
Right.
Vic Mensa and No Name. So all of us met. The
I don't
funny
know.
thing,
I don't know why she naming them because it's her.
I think Chance.
It is her.
I think Chance has me beat, but that's okay. I'm comfortable with that. That's okay. But the thing
Yeah.
about it is that's interesting is that like all of us were not there at the same time, and we were not all friends at that time. And I'm listing the Black folks because Avery talks specifically about kind of Black performance traditions, but also Jose Olivares is a good friend of mine, right? And other folks that were Luis Benavides, like all these Black and brown folks that were all coming up around this time. Amanda Torres, who's also my sister.
Oh.
And the thing about these folks is that I'll tell you, Erica, like I don't really talk on a daily basis to anybody I went to college with. There's a couple folks that I'm kind of cool with, and I'll check in with them, periodically. There's not anybody I went to high school with that I talk to every single day. The people I talk to every single day of my life are these folks. And, I think it was really powerful because Chicago is a deeply, deeply segregated city in a segregated world. And Young Chicago Authors was a space where I was, and I'll say this also about another youth writing program in Chicago, which is now called After School Matters. At the time, was called Gallery 37. For the arts ed nerds in the audience, like those are, and I did Gallery 37 before I did Young Chicago Authors. It was my first summer. I had a paid job from the city of Chicago, and it was a youth arts apprenticeship. So I got paid $5.15 an hour. I got a real check, and I went downtown every day, and I did a apprentice playwriting class. And there were other kids there that were doing, theater arts and poetry and, visual art and dance. And so I got this impression at a very young age that, that this was part of my culture, that this is part of my city, that part of what it means to be a young person in my time, in my place, is to be making art, and that's normal, right? And I was 14 and could see 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that were deathly serious about their art making, right? That like their identity was like the, adolescence is open season on identity, right? And some kids become, in Chicago, like being part of a gang can be a really big part of your identity. It could be something you inherit from your family, right? Multi-generational gang identities. For some folks, it's cheerleading or sports or athletics, right? For some folks, it might be religion, or, they find Christ at a certain age. And for me, that was my thing. Like that was my joint. And what was cool about it was that it was so normal that that there were these spaces for me to tap in, right? This wasn't just like I think a lot of people's writer origin story is like, I was a weird kid by myself on some Daria, alone in my room, like writing in my notebook.
La 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 la.
Yeah, and it's a kind of oppositional thing. Like I'm a writer and nobody gets me, or I'm an artist and nobody gets me.
Right.
And I certainly had my share of that, but actually it was like there's lots of people here who do get me, and I think that was I thank God every day to be born in Chicago, and I think that idea that there's some place for you to go where this is normal and you have people to, near peer mentors to look up to in addition to the teaching artists is just like really fundamental to who I am. And so all those folks, all those names, those are people that are also my teachers. But it's because people like Avery taught us that, to cite Gwendolyn Brooks again, right? Her first, her kind of like one of her first hit books is A Street in Bronzeville. And the premise of that title, or we could even go The House on Mango Street, right? Like, it's not incidental that there's this tradition of you're looking outside your window to figure out what needs to be talked about. The story that you have to tell about your everyday life is a story worth telling. And that's something that we all learned from Avery, and it teaches you to take your peers seriously, teaches you to take your neighborhood seriously, I realize now, by the way, that in retrospect, that Avery was also growing up because this dude, he was like 20, 25.
I had a whole
He was a baby. Yeah, he was a baby.
I was a baby. I had a whole 2 in front of my age, so it wasn't like, and it was a lot of things that in retrospect, a lot of things wasn't figured out. What you're talking about is also the way in which we were able to set these spaces up along with U Media and Cuba Links and so many different other art organizations that support and platform youth is the understanding that the art making and sharing is a matter of fellowship. So I call these places where they come to worship, right? And so those Saturday morning classes or their Thursday night rehearsals or their Monday, Wednesday, Friday over at Gallery 37. All of these spaces is where folk come to worship because this is where fellowship happens. And the building of all of their art and that the art making and at the level that Chance the rapper and you Eve and what Xavier is doing with the work that he's doing. All of this is understanding because when you all had like this very impressionable age where you have a brain and your life developing and all of those things, you were taught this idea of fellowship.
Yes.
And that art is just that. It's fellowship. And it's a very different way, I believe, in the way where like a Michael Jackson and his brothers were taught.
We weren't being taught to be stars.
Stars, right.
Yes.
They were taught to be stars and celebrities and kind of like now the world they have to be afraid of because the world is screaming at them all the time. And like Xavier Raymond can walk in a room and shift perspective because he had this practice.
Right.
He did that practice of it ever since he had a whole one in front of his age.
Right.
Walking into a room, shifting perspective because this is what they all were doing at that age. And like I said, us 20-years-olds at some point just thought we were just teaching them things that we thought were cool.
How did you get into that position, Avery? How did you become a 20-something
I literally stumbled. I stumbled into the joint because it had like there was nothing in my brain that thought that I had anything in me that could service Eve and them. I was just writing poems. And someone says, like, you should teach it. And I was like, how do you teach? How do you teach this poem? For me, so much of what I learned was through ritual and practice. And I just really found it very different coming into an office. And it wasn't the ritual and practice that I usually walked into. And I literally had to shift the space to make it that when they walked into it. Because for me, teaching art is not just about teaching art. These folks got babies, and I've been at the baby showers and the birthday parties. It's like a life you begin to share when you teach this art because the art is vulnerable space.
Mm-hmm.
And vulnerable space is also then what now you film. They call me uncle. They don't walk around calling me Mr. Young. They call me uncle or unk. So it is then I took it upon myself to love and protect. Because as 20-year-olds, we hadn't figured that part of it out yet. Right? We figured out, okay, we're going to build a house, but no one was really thinking about, wait, hold up, heat should be on. And how we going to get out of here if a fire pops off? That wasn't thought about, because that's a whole other team of people that say, hey, that's a fire marshal that comes in and say, okay, you all don't have enough or adequate exit and things of that. We didn't think about that. We were 20, and we were like, when we had one in front of our age, we felt like we were islands. Like nobody understood what it was. So let's build a space so these islands can come together and build with each other. The whole point of it, okay, we gonna teach Eve and Amanda and Xavier, and then they gonna take this so we can go to Hollywood. So we go off to Hollywood and make Black Panther. Okay,
Right.
That was the whole plan. The whole plan was that. That was the whole plan. I've done let everybody know. The whole plan. But what happens when you love and you make space, right? I take it to the James Evans character in Good Times. James Evans didn't want to surpass his children. He knew and accepted his children would surpass him, and he did everything to support J.J. Painting, Michael Reedon, Thelma Dancy, any and everything he could do to support that and move that further. And that's how I felt or feel in this work that has been done. Like she says, about 25, almost 30 years in this city is the platform. Like, just put this plant out of the ground into a bigger pot and watch it expand. It's been a blessing to see not only their life move, but my life move. My art has really been, where can I put language? And not just on page, because that's a very Euro-centric space for language, right? I come from a tradition of people who put language in the body and hold it there. And when they share it, they use the body to tell it. And I was just hoping to bring that to all of the students that I've been in contact with. It's been me teaching them, but also me making the decision to love human beings. Right? Because a lot of people do what they do with children and they go home. When they clock out, they clock out. Right? But I know that the work that Eve is doing, Eve and I are so connected in so many ways, because Eve taught my God, baby.
Yes, his goddaughter was my student.
Right.
Sixth, seventh, and eighth grade.
Right.
Yes.
Right. She taught my goddaughter.
Who now has her own children. And I last saw her trick-or-treating on Halloween. She's like, that's my favorite teacher. That's Miss E. And so, yeah, I mean,
she loves
wild.
her. Jordan loves her. And she has her own hair dynasty.
Yeah, she does hair. She does all that. And I think that the things I like, one of the things I love about podcasts is like a very niche audience, and I don't always get to talk to just arts educators. So I want to like lay plain a couple things from what Avery said. Like, the love part is so important. And I think that sometimes in these spaces, like, excellence surpasses the value of excellence becomes more important than love. Right. And the value of, that kind of individualistic language, it surpasses the value of love. And I also think, like, all the people that we were around, like all of us, a lot of us had like very serious problems, like very serious
Mhm.
things that we were dealing with at home and in the street. And nobody ever said, oh, we're going to help these at-risk youth to whatever. And I just like, there was like a dignity in that that I
Mm.
really appreciated.
Wow.
That I was very aware at a very young age of what other people thought about where I lived and how I lived and where I came from, right? Because people would not be shy about articulating that. And so I was
Mhm.
very aware of those narratives, and it felt so good to be seen and to be loved for all the other things that we were. Um, and the other thing I remember, one of the most memorable conversations for me that I ever had with Avery was him telling me what to do when I got to college. Um, and he told me, I remember where I was standing. I remember the look on his
Yes.
face. And he
I
told
was
me like,
serious.
he was very serious. And he was like, and I had the things he was telling me, there was nobody else in my life. I didn't have other adults to tell me. He was like, you gotta go to office hours. You gotta ask me, you gotta make sure the professor knows your name. You gotta sit in the front. Don't go to this type of party. Don't drink these type of
Mhm.
drinks, right? Like don't, and, and I just, my mom didn't go to I just didn't have anybody else to tell me that type of stuff. I remember Anna
Mhm.
West, who was another teaching artist,
Anna West,
and
yes.
who was
Anna West,
also,
what?
yeah, as a sister to Avery, right?
Yes.
Me being like, really, really scared about student loans. And obviously there's legitimate things to be scared about with student loans, but we also understand that like sometimes a little bit of a forgivable loan is okay. But in my family, we're a lot of folks, if you don't come from a lot of resources, you're very afraid to take on any type of debt, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes a little bit of debt can let you do a little something. And I remember Anna explaining that to me and talking about that. And so these folks were trusted adults in my life that were
Mhm.
not blood family to me, but that were kin to me, that are
Mm.
chosen family, who just had my back in all these different ways. But the further as I get to a point where I'm approaching twice the age that they were, I look back at them and I
Yeah.
recognize how, and as I'm in a space to professionally see folks who grew up in analogous situations in other cities, other organizations in other
Mm.
cities,
Mhm.
and other
Mhm.
people, that on paper were very, very the same, but in practice and in values were very different. And the way that some of the hurt from that lingers into the present. And I want to be
Mm.
very clear, part of why I didn't shout out Young Chicago Authors at the top is that that's also
Mhm.
true for Young Chicago Authors, that there are folks that have
Right.
been grievously harmed in that
Yeah.
space, and
Yeah.
ways in which there is ongoing need for accountability and repair.
Mm-hmm.
And so that can happen in all
Absolutely.
these spaces. But I was just very blessed to have these adults that were not like I see, even though Avery is naming this idea of talent, like, oh, she had talent, that was like, that was the least important part. It wasn't like, I'm going to hone this talent and then she can go
Right.
places. It was like, I see all the different pathways that this person could go, and I'm going to make sure that they're cared for in whatever way that they
Mm-hmm.
need, so that the talent, whatever else, all that stuff comes after. Like, that's easy. That's the easy part. But the
Right.
like, do you have an adult that you can trust and talk to? Um,
Yeah.
are you unconditionally loved? Like,
Yeah.
that's the hard part, right? That's
Mm.
not
Yeah.
replaceable.
No. It's wild that you say that, because like I said, a lot of the work has also been like, Eve is somebody I'm gonna go to lunch with and talk to. And she tell me about life, I tell her about
Mhm.
I tell her about life. And this is like, and it's very interesting to do what you brought up, like now and where you are in life, to understand where we were babies. Anna
Mhm.
West and I were babies. And holding down this thing. And like I said, with this organization, in retrospect, you build these things, but you don't build the security plan. And because you didn't build a security plan, there's a lot of harm that happens in that space. And I've always been like, found myself doing like Wonder Woman. But there's only so much Wonder Woman can do, right? There's only so much King that can happen in that space, and that level of accountability and responsibility has to take place. Because also in a place where you come to worship should always be a place where you can be healed, right? And all of you and heard and seen, and we don't necessarily have to agree. But if two, because all it takes is two.
Right. If two or more are gathered.
If two more gathered, that's all it takes. Two or more are gathered, and then some Pentecost can happen. Then something can actually, what Eve and a lot of them, I hope, understand. You are the legs of the work that we did. Well, that I did in my 20s. You the people. You the people that go out and say, okay, this is what happened because this person or this human being did right in their stewardship of your art making, right? And that is, I'm always immensely proud at how you bring light to my name. Because I only found myself bringing light to yours. That's all you know. It is true, Unc and Niece. I appreciate sitting across Eve. I totally appreciate always sitting across a table and what you share with me that you may not have shared with anybody else. And I'm always, she trusts me with that information. But the truth is, Erica, she's been trusting, this one right here has been trusting me with information ever since we've met. Ever since it was a whole 1 in front of her age and it was a 2 in front of mine. You know what I'm saying? And I'm trying to tell you, the person that I was at with the 2 in front of my age was totally wiggity waggity with information. Was all like that with it. But the fact that this one right here has trusted me with so much information ever since I was the one of my age that builds reverence, relationship, and like I said, that is Uncle Avery also gets on the plane when they get married. Uncle Avery also gets on the plane or take the 2-3 hour drive to see little Avery 1-year-old birthday party. It is like the life you get with this. That's all art is. Art is life. Art is life. And the evidence that people and human beings exist. The evidence that people, before we got on, I was talking about one time being in a hotel. And my next door, the neighbor in the hotel room, she had just, I guess, went through a very bad breakup. And she played I Never Loved a Man the way that I loved you, over and over.
You could hear it through the wall.
And not only could I hear it, I heard her singing it.
Oh, golly.
And it's like, let it. It's like, let it. Let it happen. Anybody else, I think, would have just called downstairs and said, hey, can you please ring her phone and knock on her door and tell her to be quiet? But because I understood when I was telling you all earlier, when she got to you're a liar and you a cheat. And I don't know why I let you. She was in there. She was in there. And she was in it. And that's what I'm saying. When you see that, I saw that with Eve and Jamila and Xavier. I saw that. And they came up in a space, a lot of them came up in a space what I don't think is that safe no more in retrospect, but slam. Like, so you gonna share all that in your body, and then some stranger's gonna go, oh, that's a 7. Oh, that's a 8.3. Oh, that's a 10. Or whatever. And that really, and like I said, in retrospect, for me, it's not the safest space to even have that level of fellowship or have that level of exposure and vulnerability of yourself as a human being. So we'll work it out, figure it out.
So interesting. We had that conversation earlier on the podcast. We talked with the Oak Park River Forest.
Did you talk with Peter Kahn?
We did.
You did.
And then Langston Kerman and
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Lang.
Rich
Lang Lang.
Robbins, who now
Yes.
works for Young Chicago Authors.
Can
and
I
we've
say-
had,
You had that convo.
yeah, we did.
Can I say something about Peter Kahn? Because hopefully
Yeah.
people have listened. And then I got to hop. But so Peter Kahn was never my teacher. Right? I didn't grow up in Oak Park. But he's everybody's teacher.
Mhm.
And so PK, to this day, okay, anytime I'm ever mentioned, it could be a podcast, it could be a news article. I'm right now I'm in the process of I'm buying a bookstore coffee shop on the South Side, which everybody should
What?
come through. Yes, it's Build Coffee and Books. Look us up. Come
We
through.
will.
6100 South Blackstone. I'm about to be over there right now. There was an article about it in the Sun-Times last week. First person to text me is always Peter Kahn. He will always send me a link. I don't think he has Google News Alert. I think he is Google News Alert. Like he will, and it'll be stuff that I didn't know was dropping. Like if I wake up at 7 a.m. and I have done the day, inshallah, if I'm ever to win like a big prize or something like that. Peter Kahn, I will wake up that morning and before the Associated Press, before Reuters, before whatever, the prize committee, I'm going to have a text from Peter Kahn saying, "Congratulations, Eve, good job." And it's just like, he just takes the time to do that. And I'm like, I know that this is multiplied by like dozens and maybe hundreds of people, right? The day that Langston wins an Emmy, he's going to wake up to that PK text, And I would say, I said to my husband, like, there's 3 certain things in this world. It's death, taxes, and Peter Kahn is going to be the first person to tell me congratulations when I do something. And I'm like, I just appreciate that about him.
Well,
Right.
And I try to do that. I try to do that for people when I see, even I haven't talked to them in years. "Oh, I saw you won, congratulations." And it's because I see him do it.
Well, and I did not know where this conversation was going to go, but it's like thinking about the broader ecology of where, this is a conversation about a relationship between 2 people, but it is also a conversation about an ecology of care that is stretched across organizations, but also types. I mean, PK was a high school teacher, right?
Generations, jobs, all these things.
And, you all mentioned UMedia. Nicole Pinkard is a dear friend of mine, and she's, on another corner of that block, of care. And, I don't know that I have anything profound by way of wrapping that up, but to say that something I really appreciate about you all is the uncovering of how an individual relationship is nested in this broader ecology of like almost like a fabric, right? That you've sewn
a tapestry.
You've sewn one another into it.
Yes.
Which it is really beautiful to listen to. It was extremely moving to witness, and I know that listeners will also find it moving.
Yes.
And I could talk to y'all forever. Oh, I feel like I've just been to church. That was an incredible opportunity to listen in on a conversation between 2 people who have been so close for so long, which is not always true of the artists and mentors that we talk to. Sometimes folks are connecting on this podcast for the first time in 20 years. But so cool to drop in on 2 people who have clearly maintained their connection to one another as artists and as people, and to give them a chance to reflect back and to think and talk about that. I mean, I was really moved by Eve's discussion of how in these relationships, love is more important than artistic excellence, and how if we focus on artistic excellence as a marker of good mentorship, we are missing out on the thing that has created this entire ecology of artists that exists in the greater Chicago universe. I thought of you while I was doing this interview, and you were off doing your main gig right now, which is the How We Made Your Mother podcast, a super successful rewatch podcast of the hit sitcom How I Met Your Mother. I was thinking of you because that community of artists has been your community of love since you were in college. And I was curious how listening to this made you feel about the way you think about your relationship with your fellow artists and colleagues.
I would say that working with people I know is the art, maybe. It's the second thing. The first thing is the idea. And then right away is the, how do I get my team of people who I manage to continually convince to work for me and with me for free to do this one also. The podcast, I'm looking at you, Doug. The podcast is a pretty good example of it. Craig Thomas, the co-creator of How I Met Your Mother, and Josh Radnor, the lead actor, the I in How I Met Your Mother, they wanted to do this. Now, they have now known each other for 20 years. That's how long it's been since the pilot of How I Met Your Mother. I had worked on the show a little bit, and then they reached out to me to produce their podcast. And sure, Craig is one of my best friends in the world, and I've known him since 1990, first week of school, 1993. And it's very much, not unlike what the Smartless guys say, not unlike what Ted Danson has a podcast with Woody Harrelson. They're just like, this just gives us time to hang out. Like, sure, we're going to make some stuff, but we're just, and you and me too. Erica, we've been friends since we were 6. And, now we just get to talk to each other like this. I would actually say that where it resonates even more with me is this other gang I've put together. And we shot a movie last year. Oh my God, maybe a year and a half ago, that God willing, the creek don't rise. I'll be finishing in a couple of weeks. And it's, the people who I've worked with on that film for 10 years, those are the babies. I've got people I've known for 45 years who are on that movie. And there are certainly of the 50, it's a tiny movie, of the 15, 20, 25 people on that, 15 of us have known each other forever. And it is the being together that creates this community, right? I'm always jealous when there's that scene in Chicago in the late 90s. Hey, in New York, there was that scene downtown in the 60s. I've never been part of a scene. I'd have no scenes. So I sort of create my own little scene. I have this group of people who I work with over and over again. And we do just want to get together and be a scene. And then let's make a thing. And I hope it's good. I hope it's great. But it's already great because we made it together. And that is definitely true.
I hope that is inspiring to listeners, because I think sometimes, especially with very successful artists, as certainly Eve and Avery are, and as your crews are, it seems like, I think it appears that it goes in the other direction, right? That you are all amazing at what you do, and therefore this group comes together. But what I got from Eve and Avery, and what I'm hearing from you, is it's kind of the other way around, right? The relationships and the love and the community is what pushes you all as artists. And that was very much what I heard even Avery talking about too, is that the excellence comes from the relationships, not the other way around.
Right. I don't think of myself as someone who has, in the movies I want to make and the podcasts I want to make, I don't really have these 5 stories, these 10 stories I must tell. What the dream is that I get to show up with basically that gang of people who made that movie and others around me who I've sort of put together. We put ourselves together. And then just almost like the studio system, the way Hollywood used to be. It's you just have a job, you show up and they hand you a script that day, and that's what you're all working on that day. I'd be very happy to work that way. If anyone's listening who can make that happen.
Well, Alec, as we take ourselves out today, did you come with a question for me or something you wanted me to reflect on?
I have long planned this one. I would like to know 3 scenes you would like to have been involved in.
Oh, yeah. Well, in high school, I was obsessed with beat poetry. So I would love to be in a hep cafe beat poetry scene.
One thing.
Also, I love 90s style hip hop that is kind of in the storytelling genre of hip hop. So like in the Tribe Called Quest, Far Side style. So, if there's like a white Jewish lady 90s style storytelling hip hop scene,
You're in.
call this lady.
Okay, you might be the leader of that scene. That's a 2.
And fun fact that I will drop here, which will give myself some accountability. I am in the middle of writing a novel, and it is in the style of a kind of Americana meets chick lit. So I would like to be in the novelists at the intersection of Americana and chick lit fiction scene.
This is exhausting to hear the names of these scenes. That's 3 things right there.
I'm very specific.
I know.
If nothing else, I have a lot of specificity.
Your scene isn't just on a corner. Your scene is on just like one side of the corner of the little hangout place, and then around the other side of the corner is a totally different scene.
I mean, I like to be in charge of things,
Yeah.
even if the things I'm in charge of are very, very wee.
Me too.
So, Alec, can you tell our listeners some ways that they can get involved with our show? It doesn't have to be 3. Just freewheel it. What are some ways that people can connect with us?
I mean, full disclosure, it's been a while, so I'm guessing there's an email, there's a website, and there's Instagram, and you should probably find those things. Is it true? Am I right?
You should do all of those things. You should like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and actually leave us a comment. That is the best way to get this feed in front of people's ear holes. So that's 1. 2, if you have ideas for guests, or if you want to just tell us how much you love the heck out of this podcast, you can write to us at artseducatorspodcast@gmail.com. And we do have an Instagram. You can look us up on Insta. You can see what all of our podcasts are, and you can connect with our community. And we would love to have you there. Just connect with us, and we can't wait to keep this rolling. So onward together.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alec Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website designed by Cole Locasio at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We're on Instagram at Arts Educators Podcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alec Lev.